The sun over Tharzun was not yellow, it was blue, and it burned the sand like fire from the sky. Jack Ward, a human from Earth, stood in chains before the alien leader, Korvac. His clothes were torn, his face dirty, and his lips cracked. From thirst, behind him stood 2 guards with bone spears, their eyes glowing behind red masks. The alien crowd shouted in a language Jack didn't fully understand, but their tone was clear anger, hatred, maybe even fear. Jack had crashed on their planet only a week ago. Since then, he had been dragged through the desert, beaten, and locked in a stone cage. Now, the leader raised one hand and the crowd went silent. Korvac's voice was deep and sharp like a growl mixed with thunder. He pointed at Jack, then toward the desert beyond the cliffs. One word repeated by the crowd echoed around him, Varaka. Jack didn't know the meaning of the word, but from their faces he knew it was bad. A group of warriors pushed him toward the cliffside, where a narrow path led down into a canyon. Bones lined the edge, big bones, not human. Some were as long as trucks, curved like swords, sharp and broken. At the bottom of the canyon, a dark wind blew, carrying a strange scent, burned meat and rust. Jack turned to one of the warriors. "What's down there?" he asked. The alien only hissed and shoved him forward. Then they cut his chains, gave him a water skin and a piece of dry root to eat. No weapons, no map, just the dead silence of the canyon ahead. He looked back once, hoping someone would show mercy, but Korvac raised his hand once more and spoke a final word. The crowd turned their backs, and the guards disappeared. Jack stepped down the rocky path, the heat burning his skin. He wiped sweat from his forehead and tried to stay calm. The further he walked, the colder it became. The blue sun disappeared behind jagged cliffs, and shadows swallowed the canyon. Something moved in the darkness. Not wind, not echo, something alive. Jack stopped and picked up a long, sharp bone from the ground. It was smoother than stone, heavier than wood, and cold to the touch. He kept walking, his ears sharp for any sound. Then came the growl, low, deep, and close. He spun around, but saw nothing. The growl came again, this time louder, from above. Jack looked up and froze. A massive shape stood on the cliff above him. It had 4 legs but no eyes, its skin like cracked black armor. It leapt down, shaking the ground. Jack ran, but the beast was faster. He dove into a cave, just barely avoiding its claws. The beast roared, the sound like metal grinding against stone. Inside the cave, Jack crawled deeper, heart racing, holding the bone like a knife. For hours, the creature sniffed outside, pacing back and forth. Jack stayed still, his breath shallow, his body shaking. Then, without warning, the beast entered the cave. Its growl filled the air like thunder. Jack screamed and swung the bone with all his strength. It struck the creature's leg, slicing a deep cut. The beast roared and slashed back, ripping Jack's shoulder. Blood sprayed the wall, but Jack didn't stop. He stabbed again, this time at its neck. The bone pierced through soft flesh beneath the armor. The beast cried out and collapsed. Jack fell with it, breathing hard, soaked in blood, some his, some not. He sat there, staring at the dead beast, his hands shaking, his eyes wide. Then slowly he stood up, pulled the sharpest pieces of bone from its body, and tied them around himself. Like armor. When the sun rose again, Jack walked out of the canyon, covered in blood, wearing the bones of the beast. The guards saw him first and froze in fear. One dropped his spear. The other fell to his knees. The crowd gathered quickly, whispering, pointing, shocked. Korvac stepped forward, his face unreadable. He looked at Jack and then at the beast's skull on Jack's shoulder. No one had ever returned from the Deadlands. The silence broke with one word, Bone Brother. It echoed through the crowd like fire. By their own ancient law, the one who killed the unseen beast could not be an enemy. He must be honored, respected, even feared. Jack didn't know the law, didn't speak their tongue. But when the warriors bowed their heads to him, he understood one thing. He had survived the trial they sent him to die in, and now, everything was about to change. Jack Ward did not sleep that night. He sat near the fire the tribe had made for him, wearing the bones of the beast like armor. His right arm was wrapped in leaves soaked in a bitter-smelling liquid. The healer, an old alien with glowing green eyes, had applied it without speaking. The crowd kept their distance, whispering and staring. Even the warriors who once kicked him now stepped aside as he passed. To them, he was no longer just a prisoner. He had become something more, something dangerous. Jack didn't understand their language, but he understood fear and respect. Still, he knew it wouldn't last. The leader, Korvac, had given him food and shelter, but never smiled. Jack had seen that look before. The same look in the eyes of commanders who sent soldiers to missions they weren't meant to return from. They weren't done with him. He had only survived the first trial. The next morning, he was woken by loud horns. Warriors lined up outside the stone huts, their bone spears raised. Korvac stepped forward and pointed at Jack, then pointed toward the southern dunes. Jack didn't need translation. He was being set out again. This time, the canyon was. Behind him, the Deadlands had a deeper heart. The sand there was black as coal and swallowed light. They gave him a pack-dried meat, water, and one curved bone knife. He looked at the knife, then at them, and shook his head. No gun? He muttered, knowing it was useless. The guards only growled and pushed him toward the dark horizon. He walked alone for hours, the sand burning his feet even through thick wrappings. He wrapped a cloth around his face to block the heat. The dunes rose like waves, tall and sharp. Every step felt heavier, like the desert was trying to pull him down. As the sun dipped low, he saw strange shapes in the distance. Not beasts, not machine statues, half-buried alien figures, with faces carved in pain and mouths open wide. Some wore crowns made of metal and bone. Others had broken limbs reaching for the sky. Jack moved closer, feeling cold despite the heat. He passed a statue with 4 arms, each holding a blade at its base. Something moved quick, smooth, silent. He froze, heart pounding, bone knife ready. Nothing came out. He stepped back, eyes scanning every shadow. Then he saw a trail in the sand, like something dragging itself. No legs, no feet, just a deep, winding path. Night fell like a curtain, and the stars above flickered red. Jack found a dip between dunes and made a small fire. He didn't sleep, he waited. Something was hunting him, he could feel it. Hours passed, wind howled. Then silence. The fire dimmed. A clicking sound broke the stillness. Click, click. Click. From the sand, something rose. It looked like a scorpion, but 10 times the size. Its body was black and glassy, and it moved like water. 2 giant pincers snapped open and shut. Jack leapt back, rolling across the sand. The creature charged, hissing like steam. Jack swung his bone knife, but it bounced off the creature's shell. It knocked him down, pinning his leg with 1 pincer. Pain shot through his body. He screamed, slashed at its eyes, 2 glowing dots above its mouth. The blade sank in and cracked one. The creature shrieked, flung him away, and twisted in pain. Jack hit the sand hard, gasping. He saw his leg bleeding, but still whole. The creature reared up, ready to strike again. He reached into his pack, pulled the dry root, and shoved it into the fire. The root sparked and exploded in smoke. The creature hissed and backed away, coughing as the air filled with bitter fumes. Jack grabbed a burning stick and stabbed it into the crack he had made. The creature flailed, shrieked again, and sank into the sand. The dunes shook, then fell still. Jack collapsed, coughing and bleeding. He had survived again, but just barely. By morning, he used the pincer like a splint, tying it to his leg with strips of cloth. He limped back toward the tribe, dragging the creature's cracked shell behind him. It took him 2 days, but when he reached the edge of the village, they were already watching. Word had spread. The bone wearer had killed another beast. The children followed him, wide-eyed. He dropped the shell before Korvac's feet. The leader said nothing, but his fists were tight. Behind him, the chief's son stepped forward. Armor polished and blade in hand, Jack knew that look too. Not fear, not respect. It was challenge, and it was coming soon. The shell of the sand beast still lay where Jack had dropped it. Its cracked black surface shimmered in the desert sun. The alien villagers kept walking past it, staring in silence. No one touched it, not even the children who once ran toward him with laughter and wide eyes. Jack stood near the center of the stone-ringed village, his legs still tied with cloth and bone. He leaned against a tall spear stuck in the ground, not for balance, but for warning. The chief's son, Varkesh, had been watching him since dawn. Eyes cold, lips tight, armor gleaming. Korvac, the tribal leader, walked out of his stone tent, his head held high, his arms crossed, his face carved in stone. He said something in the alien tongue, loud and deep. The villagers gathered fast, forming a circle around Jack and the elder. Jack didn't understand the words, but he understood the weight. This was not a welcome speech. This was judgment. His survival was a problem they didn't expect. Then, the elder priest stepped forward, old and thin, with long white bones woven into his robe. He spoke a word Jack had heard once before. Rakthun. The crowd gasped, some dropping to one knee, others looking toward Jack in disbelief. The elder pointed to Jack's beast armor, then to the sun above, then to the sand below. He drew a circle in the dirt and placed a small beast skull in the center. Jack watched carefully, trying to read the meaning. Then the elder lifted the skull and placed it at Jack's feet. A warrior beside him leaned closer and whispered in broken English, Rakthun, Bone Law, you are now chosen. Jack raised an eyebrow. Chosen for what? But the warrior didn't answer, just stepped back and bowed. The chief's son finally stepped into the circle, his blade drawn. He spoke loud, sharp, and angry. Pointing his blade at Jack, he spat a word. False blood, the crowd murmured. The elder priest raised his hand, but Varkesh stepped forward. He dropped a second skull beside Jack's, then raised his blade to the sky. The crowd froze. Even Korvac stood still. This was no longer judgment, this was challenge. Jack looked at the skulls, then at the sharp sand around them. He was standing in a sacred circle, and now a fight had been declared, not for fun, not for show, but for rank, for truth, for leadership, and Jack could not walk away. They gave him 1 hour. He limped to the edge of the village and sat beneath a stone arch. A young girl brought him water, her hands shaking as she set the bowl down. Jack nodded in thanks, his mind spinning. He had survived beasts and deserts, but now he had to face a trained alien warrior who wanted to kill him because of law, not war, not hate law. And the law said one thing clearly: if you wear the bones, you must prove you earned them. As the sun reached its peak, the drums began, slow and deep, like a heartbeat across the sand. Jack entered the ring again, this time without armor, only the sharpest piece of the creature's pincer tied to a wooden handle. Varkesh walked in with pride, blade shining, chest bare but painted with war symbols. The elder priest raised his hand and shouted a word. The crowd answered in one voice, Rakthun, and the battle began. Varkesh charged like a storm. Fast and sharp, Jack ducked, rolled, and used his good leg to kick sand in the warrior's face. The alien growled and slashed sideways, cutting deep into Jack's arm. Blood poured, but Jack stayed on his feet. He moved carefully, letting the sand slow his enemy's steps. Every time Varkesh struck, Jack dodged, blocked, or turned the attack into a miss. Then with one clean move, he stabbed the pincer blade into Varkesh's shoulder. The warrior screamed and fell, dropping his weapon, but Jack didn't finish him. He stepped back, breathing heavy, holding his arm. The crowd waited in silence. Korvac watched without blinking. Then Jack did something no one expected. He picked up the fallen warrior's blade and handed it back to him. He nodded once, turned to the crowd, and dropped his own weapon. It was a message clear and powerful. I didn't come to rule you, his voice low. I came to survive. The crowd stood frozen. Then the elder priest dropped to one knee. The others followed, one by one. Even Varkesh looked at Jack with new eyes, not of anger, but respect. The law had been followed, and Jack had proven his strength, but more than that, he had shown restraint, and that, in their culture, was power beyond blood. Korvac stepped forward, his face still unreadable. He took Jack's wrist, raised it high, and spoke in a thunderous voice. "Rakthun!" And this time, the word echoed not in fear, but in honor. Jack stood in the middle of the circle, bloodied, limping, but taller than ever before. He had been a prisoner, an outcast, a sacrifice. But now, by the law of bone and blood, he was one of them. The twin moons of Tharzun rose blood-red in the sky. The tribe gathered under their light, forming a circle of fire around the sacred arena. Drums echoed across the dunes, slow and deep. It was the night of the blood moon, a time of tests, tradition, and tribal truth. Jack stood beside the elder priest, his body still healing. Bandages wrapped around his shoulder and leg, soaked in bitter herbs. The pain was sharp, but he didn't show it. Not here, not in front of them. Varkesh, the chief's son, stood on the opposite side of the fire. His wound from the trial had healed, and his body was painted in red dust and bone ash. He had not spoken to Jack since the duel, but his eyes still held a fire, one that hadn't gone out. Korvac stood between them, his armor heavier than before. He raised his hands and spoke words only the tribe understood. Then he pointed to the sky, to the moons, and finally to the arena. Jack looked around and noticed something strange. The villagers were not cheering, not chanting, not celebrating. They were silent, eyes wide, faces still. The air was thick, heavy with tension. The elder priest stepped forward and spoke to Jack in broken English. "Tonight, one must prove, not just warrior, but spirit." Jack nodded slowly, unsure what that meant. Then he saw them bringing out two long staves made from sharpened bones and wrapped in red cloth. These were not killing weapons, they were testing tools. This would not be a fight to the death, but it would be something just as important. A trial of spirit, balance, and endurance. The arena was made of black stone, smooth and flat. In the center was a raised platform, no more than 10 feet wide. Below it, a pit glowed with heat, not fire but something deeper, a pool of steaming red sand that bubbled like lava. The challenge was clear. Stay on the platform, defeat your opponent, do not fall. It wasn't about brute strength. It was about control, focus, and the will to stand tall when the world shook beneath you. Jack and Varkesh stepped onto the platform. The crowd held its breath. The twin moons cast long shadows, turning every movement into a dance of red and black. The elder raised a bone staff, then brought it down hard, the signal to begin. Varkesh moved first, fast and strong. He struck low, aiming for Jack's legs. Jack jumped, barely landing without slipping. He countered with a quick strike to the side, forcing Varkesh to retreat. They circled each other like wolves, the bone staves clashing in bursts of speed and power. Every time one of them lost balance, the platform shook beneath their feet. One mistake, one slip, and it was over. Jack's breathing grew heavier, his body aching. Varkesh roared, and SciFi slammed his staff down, cracking the edge of the platform. Jack rolled to the side, barely catching himself with one hand. His legs dangled over the bubbling pit, the heat burning his skin, but he pulled himself back up. The crowd gasped, then cheered for the first time. Varkesh charged again, swinging wildly, but Jack ducked, stepped behind him, and tapped the back of his knee. The warrior fell forward, his hands catching the edge just in time. His legs hung over the pit. Jack raised his staff ready to strike and end it, but he stopped, just like he had during their first battle. He reached out a hand instead. Varkesh looked up in surprise. Then, slowly, he took the hand. Jack pulled him back up, both of them breathing hard, sweat dripping. The crowd stood in stunned silence. Then the elder priest walked forward, raising both hands. He shouted something ancient, something powerful. The firelight flared brighter, the drums beat louder. Kavak stepped into the arena, his eyes locked on Jack. He looked at his son, then back to the human who had once been a prisoner. Finally, he nodded and spoke a single word. Warbond. The priest turned to Jack and spoke softly. You, now, share spirit with tribe. Forever. Jack didn't fully understand, but he knew it was important. He had not just survived, not just won. He had been accepted, not as a warrior, not as an outsider, but as something more, a brother of spirit, a man of the tribe. As the crowd chanted his name, a shadow moved above. Jack looked up and saw something blinking in the stars. A ship. It was human. He stared for a long moment, then lowered his head. He had waited for that ship for weeks. Now he wasn't sure he wanted it to land, because this strange place, this tribe of beasts and bone, was starting to feel like home. The next morning, the air felt different. The sky was gray, and the twin suns had not risen fully. Clouds gathered above Tharzun, strange, dark clouds that smelled like burning metal. Jack stood at the edge of the village, staring at the Pathi hills beyond the dunes. Varkesh walked up beside him, his face calm but eyes alert. He pointed to the distant cliffs and said one word in his native tongue. Then carefully in broken English, "Old place not go." "Cursed," Jack tilted his head, curious. "Cursed? Why?" Varkesh didn't answer. He simply turned and walked away. But Jack's mind was already racing. If it was Kurstatum, maybe it was important to him. Later that day, the elder priest gave Jack a bone-carved map. It was simple symbols, lines and circles marked across a piece of dried beast hide. At the bottom corner, a red mark glowed faintly under the sun. It was far from the village, deep beyond the black dunes. Jack recognized the red symbol. It matched something he had seen on his crashed escape pod. A human emergency beacon. It meant one thing: there were human structures out there. That night, when the tribe slept, Jack packed light, water, dried root bread, the pincer blade, and a glowing stone they used for light. He didn't take much, didn't tell anyone. He just walked into the sand and didn't look back. The journey took a full day. The heat was harsh, and the dunes seemed to move when he blinked. But at sunset, he found it a ridge of stone with a deep crack running through it. Inside, something hummed, low and mechanical. He stepped into the cave. Shadows holding the glowing stone high. The walls were smooth, too smooth, not natural. He found stairs carved into the rock, leading down into darkness. And then, finally, a steel door, half buried in sand. The door opened with a hiss, dust falling like snow. Inside was a long hallway filled with flickering lights. Symbols in English glowed faintly on the walls. Unit 17 Human Research Station. Jack let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. He was not the first human here. This place had been built long before his crash. He walked slowly, passing control panels, screens, and broken drones. It smelled of oil, old air, and rust. In the center of the room was a black terminal. It came to life when he touched it, the screen flashing green. Identity scan. Match found it, Jack Ward. Then a second message appeared. Rescue ship en route Ada. 9 days. Jack stared at the screen, his heart beating faster. 9 days, that's all. Help was coming. He found logs in the system, messages from other humans who had once lived here. They had studied the creatures of Tharzun, called them synthetic beasts. Machines grown from living tissue, created for war. Some of those beasts had escaped into the wild. The tribes thought they were gods or demons, but they were just broken machines, too deadly to control. The human scientists had all vanished, either killed or fled. One log stood out. Project Bone Link. Failed. It described an attempt to fuse human minds with the beasts, to ride them, control them. But the beasts rejected control and killed their handlers. Jack leaned back, trying to understand. The creature he killed, the one whose bones he wore, had once been made by his own kind, and now the tribe worshipped its bones. The irony burned like fire in his chest. He copied the data into a small device and left the station. The door closed behind him, lost once again beneath the sand. He walked back in silence, thoughts swirling like a storm. When he returned to the village, the sky had changed. Red lightning flashed above the dunes, and the clouds rumbled with distant thunder. Varkesh ran to him, wide-eyed. "Bonefather." "Gone," he said, pointing toward the horizon. "Korvac. Leave with warriors. Take fire spears." Jack's eyes narrowed. The chief had left with armed men, and in secret. He wasn't just hunting. He was preparing for war. That night, the tribe gathered in confusion. The elder priest looked to Jack as if asking for guidance. Children cried. Mothers whispered. Warriors stood uncertain, without the leader. The tribe was breaking. Jack stepped forward, lifted the data device in his hand. He pointed to the stars above and said, "Help is coming." Some understood. Some did not. But the way he stood, the way he spoke, none could ignore it. Varkesh stood beside him and nodded. Together, they looked out into the black dunes. Something was coming, but they would not wait in fear. They would be ready. Lightning split. The sky as a sandstorm howled through the valley. Flames danced wildly in the village torches, casting strange shadows on the stone walls. Jack Ward stood at the edge of the camp, his beast-bone armor strapped tight. Beside him stood Varkesh, his blade drawn, his jaw clenched. They had no idea how many Korvac had taken, only that he had left quietly, under moonlight, with the strongest warriors and the fire spears, weapons made from salvaged human tech. Rare and deadly. Now with the tribe divided, the elder priest had turned to Jack. "Bonewearer," the priest said softly, "tribe needs strength. Or we fall." Jack looked across the frightened faces, women, children, young fighters with trembling hands. They didn't have many weapons, but they had spirit. He had to be more than a survivor now. He had to lead at dawn. Jack stood atop the central rock, the place where the tribe once knelt before Korvac. Now they gathered before him, silent, waiting. He raised one hand, holding the pincer blade high. "I am not one of your blood," he said, his voice strong. "But I bled beside you. I fought your monsters. I walked your cursed lands," he continued. "I wear the bones of what tried to kill me." He paused, the wind whipping through his hair. "And I will not let Korvac destroy this tribe for pride." The crowd roared, a sound like thunder rising from the earth. Even those who once doubted him now raised their weapons in support. Varkesh stepped forward and dropped to one knee. "Bone kin," he said. "We follow." That afternoon they prepared to move. Scouts returned with word Korvac had set camp near the Cliffs of Fire, a sacred place where leaders once met in secret. But this meeting was not sacred. It was a trap. Jack formed a plan, simple but bold. They would move through the canyons, strike at night, avoid a direct battle, break the enemy's formation, and force them to face their own fear. He had learned from the beasts of Tharzun, fight smarter, not harder. As night fell, they moved like shadows, each step silent, each breath steady. The stars above flickered like sparks. Watching from the black sky, Jack led the front, beastbone, armor gleaming under moonlight. They reached the cliffs by midnight. Below them, fires burned bright, and voices echoed through the rocks. Korvac stood in the center, wearing a full chestplate made of fused bones. His warriors stood in a circle, armed and armored, ready for war. Jack signaled with his hand from the cliffs. His fighters threw smoke bombs, gifts from the old human station. Clouds of choking gray covered the camp, and from that fog, Jack and his fighters charged. It was chaos, blades clashing, screams rising, sand kicking into the air, but Jack didn't look for any enemy. He went straight for Korvac, who stood still in the center, waiting. The old leader turned, his eyes glowing with hate. "You live." "Still," Korvac hissed in broken English. Jack didn't answer. He just raised his blade. And the two charged. Their weapons slammed together like stone on steel. Korvac was stronger, faster, but Jack was smarter. He used his smaller Framed to dodge, roll, strike from low angles. Bone hit bone, sparks flying. Korvac slashed Jack's arm, cutting through armor, but Jack spun and struck his shoulder, cracking the old warrior's armor. Blood spilled across the sand still. Neither backed down. The warriors stopped fighting and formed a wide circle. The tribe watched their old leader and their new champion fight in silence. Strike after strike, they moved like spirits. Then at last Jack found an opening. He feinted left, then drove his pincer blade into Korvac's chestplate. It shattered, the force knocking the old chief to the ground. Korvac gasped, his eyes wide. Jack stood over him, breathing hard, blade ready. But once again he did not kill. He stepped back, tossed the blade aside, and looked to the sky. No more death, he said. Only choice. He turned to the warriors watching. Your leader wanted you to fear change, he shouted. But I brought truth from the sand, and I bled for it. He raised his voice. Even louder. If you want pride, follow Korvac. If you want a future, follow me. Silence. Then, slowly, one warrior dropped his weapon. Another stepped forward and knelt. And another, even the ones who once hunted him, now bowed their heads. Korvac lay still, breathing shallow. He raised a hand and spoke weakly. Tradition binds, but you break it. He closed his eyes, and with that, the battle was over. At sunrise, Jack stood where Korvac once did. The tribe gathered around, chanting a new word, Bone King. The sky above began to clear, and far in the distance, a silver light appeared. The rescue ship, Earth, had come. But Jack wasn't just a stranded soldier anymore. He was something more. He was king. The morning after the battle, the desert was quiet. No drums, no cries, no fire spears raised in anger, only the sound of wind moving through the rocks, and the soft voices of a tribe that was finally at peace. Jack Ward stood on the high stone, overlooking the sands. His armor was cracked, his body bruised, but he stood tall. Below him, the tribe moved slowly, rebuilding tents, gathering supplies. A new rhythm had begun, not ruled by fear, but by hope. The elder priest came forward, carrying a folded beast-skin cloak. He placed it over Jack's shoulders and bowed his head. You wear bones, he said softly, but lead with heart. The people knelt as Jack walked through the village, not as outsider, not as guest, but as Bone King. But as the sun reached its peak, the ground trembled. A low rumble shook the cliffs, and the clouds above spun into a spiral. The people gasped and pointed upward. From the sky, a silver shape broke through the clouds, shining. Silent, unstoppable, the rescue ship, long, wide, armored in white plating with blinking blue lights, it hovered over the cliffs, slowly descending. The symbol of Earth printed on its side, bold and sharp. United Human Fleet. Jack felt a rush in his chest. He had waited so long to see that sign again. A ramp opened from the ship's belly, and armored soldiers stepped out, weapons ready, their helmets turned, scanning the tribe, unsure what they were looking at. One of them stepped forward, a woman with dark eyes and a captain's badge. She paused as she saw Jack approaching. Lieutenant Jack Ward? She asked, her voice echoing in the translator mic. Jack nodded slowly. That's me. The soldiers lowered their weapons slightly. You were reported dead after crash 6 weeks ago, she continued. We tracked the emergency signal here yesterday. Jack gave a tired smile. Yeah, I was almost dead twice. She looked past him at the tribe behind him, at the beast armor he wore, the scars on his face, the bone blade at his side. You've integrated, she said, surprised. Jack nodded again. They sent me to die, he said. But I came back leading. The woman looked at him for a long moment. Then she glanced at the elder priest, at the kneeling children, at the smoke rising from cooking fires. This place, she said slowly, isn't what we thought. No, Jack replied. It's more. The mission log was simple: rescue, recover, return. But the choice in Jack's heart was not. He could go home, back to Earth. back to steel cities and empty skies, or he could stay where he was. Not just a soldier, not just a survivor, but something far greater. The captain turned to her crew. Medical team, scan for injuries, but do not interfere. She walked beside Jack through the village, listening as he told the story. About the trial, the beasts, the challenge, and the law of bones and blood. She listened, and when he finished, she simply said, "Then we'll leave you in peace." Jack was silent for a moment. Then he turned and looked at the children playing. With broken beast skulls, he watched Varkesh training younger warriors with laughter in his voice. He watched the elder priest painting symbols of unity on a rock. Then he looked back at the ship. "I'll send a report," he said. "They'll want details about the failed weapon program and the synthetic beasts." The captain nodded. "And you?" Jack looked at the horizon, red and gold under the twin suns. "I stay," he said. "I built something here, something Earth never gave me. A tribe?" She asked. "No," he said with a faint smile. "A future." The crew stayed for one day, long enough to patch wounds, drop supplies, and shake hands. Then the engines roared once more, and the ship rose into the sky. The villagers watched it disappear like a silver bird flying home. But Jack did not watch. He stood at the edge of the village, carving new symbols into stone. A circle of bone, a broken blade, and a man standing tall. Not a king of gold, not a god of war, but a leader who walked into death and returned with the truth. The sky opened, and with it came a choice. Jack had chosen not the past, not the rescue, but the story that was still being written, not in blood, but in bone, from that day on. The tribe told tales of the human who wore the beast's bones, of the man sent to die who became legend, of the one who earned their respect not with fire, but with honor. They called him not Jack, not soldier, but the Bone King. And under his rule, the desert finally knew peace.